No, but I mean, like, I work for CBS. CBS's goal is to make money, but they have a news arm to it, you know.
Right.
And I think that they're, you know, if they can't make money if people aren't buying the service, and people only buy the service if there's content and there's information that they want to consume on those networks.
And what comes to mind with that is the potential merger of Comcast and NBC Universal. That's a whole other
Which
thing.
I think is a whole separate, it's a separate.
It is. But that, if you kind of follow the skepticism, the paranoia, the journalist's job is to kind of be informed and see how these issues come together, give context to this complex issue, and kind of like a domino.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
You know, Robert, I would actually argue that I would like to see ONA participate more in discussions about some of these big mergers than net neutrality, because I think the big mergers are more dangerous to how we consume content and the content that we're going to be able to see than who controls the actual pipes to deliver this content. I mean, you've got the NBC Comcast merger, and then now you've even got AT&T and T-Mobile merging, which is also potentially not a great thing for information in general and for consumers.
Go ahead, JG.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think, you know, from perspective of access to the internet and getting content from the internet, in some respects, AT&T Mobile may be more significant. You're talking in a lot of the country of going from 4 providers to 3, at least major providers of access for mobile, and you're also talking about eliminating one of the low-cost providers. And so from the perspective of, you know, sort of eyeballs, who can get access to multiple places, you know, that may have more impact on this landscape than Comcast and NBCU.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and it is a complex issue, and it's one that's been going on for several years, and it's going to go on for the next, how many years? How long is this conversation going to happen? And the ebb and flow stuff. I'm not asking you to give me a timer, but what's this mean, and how long? There is this thing where people are I've heard net neutrality. The average citizen is confused about what it is. They have that knee-jerk reaction about, say, the internet. But then they might get burned out, and this might fall off their radar. What are the next steps, and how do we keep this conversation going?
Well, I would say the only reason that it's probably being talked about now is because Obama got elected, and he said he supported net neutrality, and now people are kind of holding him to that. Because this debate has been going on for a long time, and it sort of faded away, you know, a couple of years before the election, or about a year before the election. So, you know, I think it's probably going to be as long as we have lawyers who want to argue about it, to be perfectly honest with you.
JG, do you want to respond?
It's the clients. It's the clients.
Exactly.
But I think, you know, the reality of this is exactly that this debate really picked back up when Obama got elected president, and I think we'll see a push on it by the Republicans this year that they'll probably, if they don't succeed, and I don't think that they will succeed on the Hill, well, that will die down. But it will come up in the presidential election in 2012, and if the president is not reelected, then you likely see an FCC that will overturn the rules even if the courts haven't. If the president is reelected and the rules stay in place, I suspect the debate dies down because they'll just become part of the landscape. There are a whole lot of examples of that sort of thing having happened in the telecom space, particularly where the issues are complicated and technical, and it's hard to keep attention for a long period. But my guess would be, one way or another, it's going to be settled probably by 2013.
I mean, I think there's sort of like a more philosophical answer, which is sort of that this is part of a conversation that, you know, sort of predates even the internet about access to information and who gets to produce information, who gets to consume information. And, you know, we're having this discussion about how people produce and consume information on the internet right now. But, you know, I think it does, again, have to do partly with, you know, the amplification of already strong voices and the potential marginalization of voices that are not as loud, and that, you know, is a conversation that's been happening in journalism forever, and I think will continue. At least I hope it keeps continuing for a really long time. I mean, you know, again, I think like, as we were talking about briefly when you guys both dropped out, the issues around the regulation of the mobile web versus the wireline
Yes.
web and the racial implications of the demography of who's on which form of internet is significant. I think it's significant that Unity was one of the only trade associations to file comment to the FCC on the docket around net neutrality, which of course Trade Association for Journalists of Color. You know, because I think communities of color have sort of had their voices heard in a different way with the rise of the internet and the ability to, you know, have internal conversations and outward-facing conversations. You know, and I think that people who have historically been less heard maybe are more concerned about the potential for their voices to be shut down. Whether or not that does happen in a web with or without net neutrality, I think, again, is like an open question, but I think it's a long conversation. It's been happening, and now we're having it with this particular slice of policy and this particular technology. But it's one that, you know, I think is a critical question for all journalists, people who care about informing their communities, which I think is what we all care about.
And access has really been an ongoing topic at the FCC on all sorts of levels. I mean, you had open access debate on internet in the 90s, and in the FCC's broadband plan, they're looking at expanding access, you know, in rural areas for low-income populations and all other areas like that. And it is, to a very large extent, something that is an ongoing topic of discussion in the telecom universe, and likely will be, because it's part of the mandate of the FCC, maintain as much access as possible to communications technologies because of the belief that's beneficial to consumers and the country as a whole.
And economic development implications. I mean, there's a million job reasons why people need access to the internet too, besides just consuming and producing news.
Do you think there's a chance that these internet pipes, the series of tubes, will become something that is like our highways and streets that are maintained by local government, state government, federal government, opposed to privatized pipes?
I would say no, we're not going to see that, mainly because, you know, we've already sort of established a process and a regime where you've got private industry investing billions of dollars, and you can't really sort of take that away and say this is a utility and now the government is going to run it. It doesn't really quite work that way. And, you know, I don't know, maybe JG has some more thoughts on that.
I would say that the U.S. model in communications has been, since Alexander Graham Bell, that it's private, and we stayed that way even when the rest of the world largely did not go that way, and now the rest of the world is tending back towards private ownership. It's really hard to imagine an environment in which the government would take ownership of the internet or of access to the internet itself. There are just too many roadblocks that would prevent it from happening.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard, but people aren't that into. Yeah.
I feel like I was going to say AT&T is like the largest contributor to political campaigns, so they're not going to let it happen. But go ahead, Kat. Sorry.
Also, like here in DC, people aren't like that keen on big government these days, so the idea of like bigger government is probably not going to go that far right now.
Well, we mentioned briefly about the international approaches. What is the global point of view on net neutrality? What are the different aspects that are out there?
European Union is looking into it right now. They seem to be taking more of a wait-and-see approach at this point, and I think that's probably where, from what I know, the most activity. Maggie and Kat may have more information, but outside of the EC, I don't know too much else.
Yeah, I haven't been following it as closely outside the U.S., but, you know, as JG mentioned, I know that the European Union is looking into it, and yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But, you know, really when it comes to a lot of this stuff, I mean, the U.S. is the leader, particularly, well, really now in wired and wireless broadband. You know, we have, I mean, people would argue that we're not the leader in wired broadband in the sense of, you know, how many homes are connected and the speeds, but you also have to think geographically we're quite a lot larger than a lot of other countries. But certainly in wireless, we're way ahead of some of our foreign counterparts in terms of, you know, 4G services up and running, and So I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Well,
But
go
we
ahead, Kat.
are pretty terrible in terms of the speed that we have compared to a lot of other places.
Well,
and
I think
rural
it's.
penetration.
I think some of those numbers actually get a little blown out of context. When you look at where speed is highest in the U.S., it's in densely urban areas. And if you look at a lot of countries that are professing to have better connectivity speeds, like in South Korea and places like that, people live in high rises and the population is very dense there. So when you look in aggregate at the U.S., when you've got people living in the middle of Montana, it kind of throws off the averages.
I mean, yeah, we could go into a whole conversation about South Korea. I was there, and there's some really cool rural broadband stuff happening, but
Yes, there is.
a different conversation.
Yeah.
Casey has another question, and I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but does the global platform of the internet present issues beyond capitalism in the U.S.? Does someone want to tackle that question?
I am not totally sure what that question means.
I don't even know. Yeah, I'm not sure what it means.
Well, I'm not sure either, but I would say this, that the internet has become one of those ways in which U.S., for lack of a better word, values get projected to the world. And, how we deal with the internet probably does have an impact on how the rest of the world thinks about it. And, there are a lot of different contexts. I mean, you think about, I guess a year ago during the unrest in Iran, and Twitter was going to do maintenance, and they decided to not do the maintenance because of a request from the State Department to allow people to continue using Twitter in Iran. And that was a recognition that there is a real impact beyond the U.S. of what happens with the internet in the United States, and that's something I think policymakers have to think about.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you all for participating. Maggie, where can folks follow you on the internet? Where can they find your stuff and what you cover online?
I am on cnet.com under the news tab, and I have a blog called Signal Strength, and I also do a weekly column where people can ask me questions about wireless and broadband at Ask Maggie.
Kat, where can people find you and your work online?
Well, I mostly write about financial and economic issues for the Investigative Reporting Workshop, and we have, we're at investigativereportingworkshop.org, and I'm on Twitter at @CatAaron, and I'm also a fellow at the Media Policy Initiative at the New America Foundation, which is where you might find me writing about media policy-related things.
Great. And JG, how can folks hire you as a lawyer?
www.dowlohnes.com, where you can also find memos that we do on broadband-related issues, including the ones we've done on network neutrality.
We'll have the links to the FAQ, to Kat's article, and to JG's memo on the Tumblr blog. This is our second episode of ONA Issues. Thank you all for participating and joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks.
My pleasure.
Thanks.